Hello, this is Reindeer's Bees, and today I'm going to talk about the 3 best ways to make splits. They're really the 3 most common ways to make splits even. So first, there's walkaway splits. A walkaway split is when you don't use queen cells or a mated queen. You just either move the queen out of your original hive with some bees, brood, and honey into a nuke box or another hive body, and then you leave the hive that had the queen to make a new one. They're nice, big, strong hive. They should be able to make pretty good queen cells. The only possible issue with this is walkaway splits, generally when you let the bees raise their own queen, they seem to pick the older larva and not the younger larva. So if a beekeeper raises the queens via grafting, they'll choose the larva that's much younger. And if the larva is younger, then it'll have a longer time to be fed royal jelly before it's capped. And if that's the case, they're likely to make a better queen. So that's why I would not do a walkaway split. A lot of people do them. They can work. It's just not my preference to do so. Especially if you're pulling bees and brood out, putting it in a nuke box, and leaving the queen behind in the original hive. That hive's not going to have that many nurse bees to raise those new queens. So naturally, those queens will likely not be as good because they didn't have as many nurse bees feeding the queen cell because you moved her into a nuke. Now this can be somewhat fixed by adding more nurse bees, but it's just hard to get the same amount of nurse bees as you can if you pull the queen from the original colony. But what you need to do when you're making a walkaway split is you want to make sure that whatever side has doesn't have a queen, they need to have eggs. So if you aren't pulling out the queen, then make sure that the split you're making has eggs so the bees are able to use those eggs which hatch into larvae, and then they'll turn that larva into a new queen. So I don't like walkaway splits. They're definitely not my favorite method. I've done it before, but I prefer using either swarm cells in some situations, or just mostly what I've done is grafted queens and used queen cells. So, and I have made mated queen splits as well. So, part 2. This is the one that I use the most often, not even close. I do this all the time. I use queen cells. So I think queen cells are probably my favorite way to make splits because a queen cell, if you're buying from a big commercial producer, it could be like $8, but even if it's a smaller queen producer, it'll still be only like $15. So you're buying a queen cell for $15. You can buy about 3 queen cells for every 1 queen, roughly, depending on where you live. So if I bought 3 queen cells, then statistically, I'm very likely to get at least 2 of those queens, possibly even all 3 back from the mating flights, which would be worth over $120 once they're mated. So I'm getting much more value for somewhat of a risk. But if I buy 3 queen cells and that costs me $45 and I get 2 queens back, I'm getting exponentially more value. And so the reason why they're not worth as much is because they're not mated. So it's not a guarantee that they'll become the queen, but it's a high probability. If you get 2 queens, then you're going to get 1. If you buy 3 queens, you're going to get 2. Roughly 75 to 80% mating is normal in most places. Depends on where you are, depends on the time of the season, but queen cells are highly underused and should be used a lot more for splits. They can be used on bigger hives. They're more likely to accept a queen cell than a mated queen. And you can make the split any size you want. So what I like to do generally, if you're using queen cells, the average nucleus colony would be 2 frames of capped brood and 1 frame of honey. I would leave that queenless either for like a week or 8 to 24 hours, and then drop in the new queen. And then if you're able to, go through and kill any queen cells they do have, and they'll be quite likely to accept your queen. Another great thing that you can do to help improve your likelihood of that queen being accepted is to use queen cell protectors. Bees can chew out cells from the bottom, but they're less likely to if you have a queen cell protector on. They'll only be able to chew it from the bottom, so you're just giving yourself a better chance. So queen cell splits, you can use them on big hives to requeen. You can use them, queen cells, to make small splits, medium-sized splits, whatever you want to do. I think queen cells are highly underrated and need to be used a lot more in splitting and just in beekeeping in general. They're a very economical way to grow your bees, and Even let's say if you just had 5 hives, it would be worth it to buy them, because let's say you want to, on average, you're going to have to replace 2 to 3 of your queens every year for your 5 hives. You're going to spend over $120 if you decide to replace them with a mated queen. But if you make splits in May, let's say, with some queen cells, they go out, mate, then when it's time to requeen, you have those and you only paid 45 or 35, something, not much money, 35, 40 bucks. So they're just an extremely useful way. And how you actually install them is you want to go to the outside of the brood nest and then you can just push them into the comb, or you can not squish them, but gently put them in between the frames. You want to put them on the frames, push them into the comb if the hive's really small, but if it's a bigger hive, then it'll be okay to put them in between the frames. Very, very gently. There's plenty of videos showing you how to install queens. I'll try to find one and link it below. So queen cell splits, my favorite way. They work great. They're extremely economical. Try them out. It's worth a shot. So the third and final, I don't know if it's the most common way, it could be using mated queens. So it's the simplest way to split, because when you put in that queen, if they do accept her, which a good amount of time they do, that hive's off to the races. They're going crazy. It's not like the Walkaway Split. It's not going to take them 25 or 30 days before they even get a laying queen back, much less 50 days till they have any bees hatching. So it takes a long time for Walkaway Splits to take and start actually growing. So the mated and the queen cells are faster. It will only take roughly like about 12 days for her to start laying at most, and then another 21 days. So it's about 30 days after you put in a queen cell that the hive will start to grow in population. But the mated queen, they're going to grow instantly. 3 weeks in, the population will already be climbing. They'll already have bees hatching. So I would suggest that when you're doing mated queen splits, that you have the split relatively small. Bees are less likely to accept a mated queen than a queen cell. Queen cells are just less hassle, and the bees have a different expectation for them, rather than when you're adding a new mated queen. It's more natural for the bees to have a queen cell appear than a brand new mated queen. The pheromones are different, the situations are different. So when you're making a mated queen split, you really want to ideally have it relatively small, so only maybe 3 or 4 frames of brood at the most, I would say. Most people make them much smaller, like 2 frames of brood. And then they'll wait for the hive to be queenless, at least for a day. And then ideally it's good to come back and destroy their queen cells and then add your queen. The best way, the bulletproof way to get your queen introduced, is the Corey Stevens method. I'll link the live stream below where I did with him, where we talk about it. But to give us a quick synopsis of it, it's basically you go through the hive, you pull out the queen, make them queenless. Then a week later, or 9 days later, I think, you go into the hive, you destroy all the queen cells, and then you add the queen. And since there's still open larvae at that time, if they had eggs when you put them in, when you split them off, then they still have larvae, so there's still some kind of pheromone synergy that's good. And then the larva's way too old for them to make new queens. So they're basically forced to either death or your queen. So they're gonna choose your queen. And it works with virgin queens. So with the mated queens, they work even better, I'm sure, because they have a better pheromone profile. They're more mature. So when you're making those splits, there's a lot of reasons why mated queens can be ideal. It's really, the hive's just gonna get going a lot faster. I've actually not made a split with my own queens yet, a mated queen split. I've only used queen cells, but before I started making my own queens, when I was buying them, I made, 3 or 4 mated queen splits. They're pretty simple. Just make sure the hives aren't way too big, and it should work out pretty well. There's a lot of factors when it comes to queen introduction, and I hit on some of them here, but really there's a lot to understand, and it's a very nuanced topic. And I went through all the factors up here in the video. It talks about what factors go into queen introduction. So how old the bees are, how much food's coming in, and many other factors. To really understand how to introduce queens for splits, you really need to watch this video.